For the first fight in the card, we got Fatima Kline versus Melissa Martinez. Kline comes into this 7-1, 25 years old, 5'6" with a 67-inch reach. Melissa Martinez comes into this 8-1, 27 years old, 5'2" with a 66-inch reach. Kline's return is exciting, but let's be absolutely honest. This is a huge step down in competition. The UFC seems to be lining her up for another highlight win. Melissa Martinez does have some flash to her game. Solid movement, fast hands, and the karate-based blitz style, but overall, she hasn't looked UFC ready. Kline, on the other hand, is aggressive, well-rounded, and absolutely massively underrated. She brings a serious physicality and has elite grappling chops, not just for control, but lately she's shown that a real mean streak with her ground and pound. In her last fight, she looked very much willing to pour it on once she got into dominant position. It's a big evolution for her. And when we're talking about her grappling, because that's where this fight is going to go. Let's be honest, it's where it's going to be decided. Martinez has shown some real concerning habits. She was taken down and controlled by Elise Reed, who's not exactly known for her wrestling. Worse, she initiated some of it, some of the grappling herself, and clearly didn't know how to get back up. Against someone like Kline, those errors are going to very much not going to go unpunished. Martinez is also a former animalweight. She's small for the 115, and she fights even smaller. Kline, meanwhile, has competed up F flyweight. That size and strength difference is going to be a big, it's going to matter here, especially in the clinch and on the mat. Martinez got muscled by another strawweight. How is she going to handle someone bigger, more skilled, and far more aggressive? On the feet, the gap might look closer, but even that's misleading. Martinez is fast and she moves well, but leaves her chin wide open, doesn't really move her head at all. Kline has some good hands, good timing, and hits harder than people think. If you can cut the cage and get Martinez against the offense, that speed won't really matter. I think really the only question is, does Kline finish her or dominate for 15 minutes? I gotta go with the finishes her. You know, she's not known for hitting submissions. She's used to grappling, more positional control. But that being said, I do think that she'll find a way to get on top, get a dominant position, and just ground and pound and finish Martinez here. I got Kline to win by TKO. It's kind of hard. Maybe second round, third round. I wouldn't be shocked first round. I got her winning by finish here. Up next on the card, we got Mitch Ramirez versus Mike Davis. Ramirez comes to this 8-2, 32 years old, 5'11" with a 71-inch reach. Mike Davis comes to this 11-3, 32 years old, 6'0" with a 72-inch reach. And I think this is going to be an absolute one-sided beatdown waiting to happen. Davis coming off a rougher performance, but the UFC is clearly setting him up for a bounce-back opponent, and Ramirez just doesn't really belong at this level. When they're starting with Ramirez, he's tough, but technically he's not UFC ready. His striking is basic. He throws one shot at a time, doesn't use combinations, and the defense is just really bad. He doesn't move his head. He doesn't really block well. He really can't check the kicks and just really stands there and eats shots. It's really a terrible recipe against someone like Davis, who's a slick, high-volume boxer with nasty leg kicks and far more speed and dynamicism. On the feet, David should pick him apart really with ease. He's a sharper and I think cleaner fighter, and I think if he puts everything together, I think it's just going to really be a really one-sided beatdown here. Ramirez might have some power, but Davis has the output and the accuracy and really the footwork to shut that down before anything really becomes a problem. Regarding the grappling, Davis is underrated there. Even if he's not perfect, he makes mistakes on the mat, leaves openings, sometimes gives up position, but when he gets on top, he's excellent at passing and threatening submissions, especially at the arm triangle. He passed them out easily against better guys than Ramirez. If this hits the ground, I don't see Ramirez surviving long. One concern is that Davis hasn't trusted his striking lately. In the Levy fight, he abandoned his hands completely after hurting him in the with the first punch. And against ZM, he looked off, though that might have been due to the locker paint fumes, which is wild and apparently legit given off of all the news that we got. Still, he's been leaning heavily into his wrestling, which works here, but raises some questions about his confidence in his hands. Even with those concerns, this matchup is absolutely all Davis here. He's better absolutely everywhere. I think he's faster. I think he's stronger. So I got Davis by submission here. I got him getting it done in the second round. I think this is an absolute beatdown. Up next on the card, we got Kennedy Nzechukwu versus Valter Walker. Nzechukwu comes into this 14-5, 33 years old, 6'5", with an 83-inch reach. Valter Walker is 27 years old, 6'6", with a 78-inch reach. And I'll tell you right from the beginning, I got Valter Walker in this one. And picking Valter Walker is not going to be a popular take. And if if you're looking for a live dog with a clear path, he's got one. Nzechukwu is a big and powerful striker, but he's very inconsistent. He struggles to deal with pressure, he's hesitant on the feet, and he's prone to freezing when facing any sort of takedown threat. That hesitation is where Valter Walker is going to thrive. I think, yes, Valter Walker's heel hook wins have come against low-level competition, absolutely, but they weren't flukes. He's committed to that submission style, and more importantly, he knows exactly what he wants to do. Blast the double leg, drag you to the mat, attack the legs immediately. It's a high-risk, high-reward kind of style, but it's worked multiple times, and he hits. And if he hits it early, before cardio or chaos sets in, I think he has a really good path to victory here. Kennedy's shown decent takedown defense, but mostly against fighters who couldn't really pressure him. He hasn't really faced a grappler who immediately threatens legs or scrambles hard for submissions. If Valter Walker can get him down even once, he'll go all in for a finish. What's key here is Kennedy's mental game. He doesn't always respond well to early adversity. If Valter Walker surprises him with pressure, Kennedy might hesitate, and that hesitation can easily lead to a bad scramble or giving up a limb. And unlike most heavyweight fighters, Valter Walker wants chaos. He doesn't really care about holding position. He's looking to finish instantly, and even though heel hooks are risky, they work if your opponent panics or has gaps in his defense. Both things that Kennedy has shown in the past. Both people also overlook how dangerous that approach can be in round one. Walker's got one round of cardio, but it's an explosive, aggressive round. If he forces Kennedy to the mat early, there's a real window for a submission before things slow down. On the feet, absolutely, Kennedy has the edge. But if Walker gets things down to the ground, I do think he has a really good path to victory here. But I will not just overlook the fact that Nzechukwu, his power, he's extremely powerful. We're not going to say that he's not. He is 1 inch shorter, but he does have a significant reach advantage here. He does throw a lot more. He's even knocked out Oberg. So we're just not going to overlook that. But I just think his hesitation here is going to be a key factor here. So I'm going for Valter Walker, round 1 submission. And if he doesn't get it done, he's probably going to get knocked out. Up next on the card, we got Lauren Murphy versus Eduarda Moura. Murphy comes into this 16-6, 41 years old, 5'5", with a 67-inch reach. Moura's 11-1, 31 years old, 5'6", with a 67-inch reach. This is one of the weirdest matchups I've seen in a very long time, and I don't really even know why it came together. Murphy was booked to fight Karina Silva, then the UFC scrapped it immediately and just cut her. I get it, she was injured, but just getting dropped that fast, it feels like there's a lot more going on here. Now that she's back, they're just throwing her against Moura, who's a massive favorite, and I get why, but I'm not fully sold on her either. Let's be honest, she's not the best, but it is Murphy. Early on, Moura looked like a dominant grappler, but that was mostly against low-level opponents. In the UFC, she hasn't looked as dominant. Her takedowns are almost all clinch-based and not really super clean. She can get top control, but doesn't really do damage with it, which is really the problem here. Against, Gomez in that fight, I'll give her some slack, for being compromised, but still, it was a really rough. It was a really, really rough fight to watch. It was terrible fight IQ, giving up position, just absolutely no resistance on her side. She looked better in her flyweight debut, especially on the feet, which surprised me. Her striking is awkward and kind of clunky, but it's very effective. She outstruck Hardy in her last fight and held her own against Gomes, and it's very much not pretty, but it works. Murphy, on the other hand, she's tough and has that crackhead strength, sort of say. She's not a great striker by any means, but she makes fights ugly. Her takedown defense is solid enough, and she has a legit black belt. She's not lost on the ground either, but I think, Moura might take her down, but she'll have to work for it, absolutely. Even if she does, I'm not convinced she'll get a finish here. Her control is fine, but her finishing ability hasn't really stood out in the UFC. What really concerns me for Murphy is that she is so old. She hasn't fought in 2.5 years, coming off of a leg injury. She was never really dominant in her prime, really, either. With the layoff and the age, how can you really pick the Murphy sides beside the fact that she has experience, So I got Moura by decision. I think this is an easy choice. It's not a fight that I'm excited to watch. Up next on the card, we got Jake Matthews versus Chidi Njokuani. Matthews comes into this 21-7, 30 years old, 5'11" with a 73-inch reach. Njokuani is 25-10, 36 years old, 6'3" with an 80-inch reach. This is one of the most underrated fights on the card, in my opinion. On paper, it looks like a classic striker versus a well-rounded technician kind of a fight, but there's a lot more nuances here. When regarding Njokuani, physically, he's just a monster at welterweight. He has massive reach, a very long frame, and knockout power with absolutely really every limb that he possesses. His striking is very clean and he's very technical. And when he's allowed to fight at his pace, he's extremely dangerous. He's also improved his takedown defense and his ability to get off the mat. But there are still concerns. He is still 36 years old and has shown durability issues and tends to fade when the pace is getting pushed. His wins at 170 have looked very solid on paper, but when you look and watch them back, they weren't really clean. That McKee fight was sloppy and arguably lost a round against ZDS. And then there's Jake Matthews. He's been in the UFC forever, and while he's never turned a corner into elite territory, he's extremely well-rounded and battle-tested, fast hands, sharp combinations, and when he does mix in his grappling, he becomes a very tough puzzle to solve, sort of saying. The issue is he's barely using his wrestling, which I don't really understand. Since his loss to Sean Brady, Jake has gone full striker mode, just 2 takedowns in the last 5 years, and even when he gets them, he doesn't really do much with them. His top control is average, and he can be reversed or let his opponents get up too easily. His black belt doesn't really translate into dominant ground control, but even with that, Matthews has some real advantages here in this fight. His boxing is faster. He's the younger, more fighter as well, the more durable fighter. He tends to make fights closer, even against dangerous opponents. And Chidi's style, which, a measured outside kickboxer, is exactly the kind of opponent Jake is comfortable with. Matthews doesn't force a high pace, but he's very composed and accurate. If he can get inside Chidi's long reach and land combinations while staying defensively sound, he can absolutely edge some rounds here. Chidi, I think his power is always a threat, but Matthews has only been stopped once by ground and pound and has otherwise held up very, very well, even when hurt. The path is there for Matthews. Stick and move, land clean hands, maybe mixing a takedown or two and steal a round, or break the rhythm and avoid some big shots. Chidi might land the flashier strikes, but if Jake controls the tempo and gets in and out with fast combinations, I think he's going to rack up the points and frustrate Chidi. And so, therefore, I got Jake Matthews to win by decision here. I do think the over props hit on this one, so I got Jake Matthews on decision. Up next on the card, we got Chris Curtis versus Max Griffin. Chris Curtis comes into this 31-12, 37 years old, 5'11" with a 76-inch reach. Griffin comes into this 20-11, 39 years old, 5'10" with a 75-inch reach. So Chris Curtis is a big favorite here, but there are some concerns here. He is coming off of a big KO loss, has a lot of mileage on him with all those fights that he's fought, and he's cutting back to 170 for the first time in a lot of years. There's a lot of red flags there. That being said, this is a great stylistic matchup for him. Griffin is not a high-volume guy. He's powerful, absolutely, but he is reckless. He throws with some bad intentions and banks on landing something big. Curtis, on the other hand, is a slick counter-striker. He does his best work in the pocket, sets up everything behind a solid jab, and punishes the body with clean hooks. He's fundamentally sound and sharper on the inside. The key thing here is Griffin will fight in the pocket. He won't stay long range or stick and move. He'll give Curtis exactly the fight he wants, but that doesn't mean it's risk-free. Absolutely not. The problem with Curtis is his durability. He's been reacting poorly to punches recently. The Kopylov fight, Kopylov hurt him multiple times, honestly badly. Allen had some success on the feet, and now he's cutting weight on top of it. Griffin hits hard, and early in the fight, Curtis is definitely vulnerable. But the longer it goes, the more it favors Curtis. Griffin tends to fade after round 1. Whether it's cardio or confidence, he just stops really throwing. That's why nearly every fight that he doesn't finish turns into a close decision. Even in wins, often hinge on 1 or 2 moments in his fights. If Curtis doesn't get caught early, he should outbox Griffin with cleaner, more consistent work. I don't really think Griffin has the volume or the IQ to win minutes here, but given Curtis's durability, I do think there's issues. So I do see him staying at negative 300, but I don't see him losing this one, especially if it goes past the first round. So give me Curtis by decision. It can get sketchy, but over the 15 minutes, I do think he'll get it done. Up next on the card, we got Junior Tafa versus Tuco Tokkos. Tafa comes into this 6'3", 28 years old, 6'3", 75-inch reach. Tokkos comes to this 10-5, 35 years old, 6'4", with a 76-inch reach. I think this is one of the most dog shit low-level fights that you'll get. Honestly, it's barely even regional quality. But weirdly enough, this might make a good fight. Both guys are very sloppy. They're gassy. They're raw. But they're going to stand in there and bang. That's for absolute sure, Starting off with Tokkos. On paper, he's the quote-unquote wrestler. But in reality, he's just really not that good. He trains at top gym, his corners are top guys, but none of that really rubs off of him. His grappling is full of holes. He'll take your back and get mount and then lose the position within seconds. If you really watch his fights, he gasses mid round 1. By round 3, he's backing up, breathing heavy, and getting tagged. His striking, he really just does light taps and single shots. There's really no combos. There's really no power. And defensively, he's bad. It just doesn't look good. And he looks like he wants to be in there. He doesn't want to be in there when it gets ugly, so to say. Regarding Tafa, absolutely not elite, but at least he fights. His last performance was embarrassing, but he came forward and kept throwing. That matters here. He's got a good kickboxing background and throws with real intent. Tokkos won't like getting hit, and Tafa's pressure alone might really break him. Both guys have cardio issues, no question. But Tafa fights through his. Tokkos really just melts. And I think that will be the difference here. Even with the grappling edge that Tokkos should have, I don't think it's reliable enough. Everyone he's faced has gotten up. He can't really hold position. Tafa may not have the skills on the ground, but he's strong enough to muscle out of bad spots, I would think, He looks like he's actually just taking the camp seriously as well. He's cutting down to 205. He looks a lot, he looks a lot better, his body. And he looks a lot more in shape. And I think that's going to help his gas tank, First glance, I was thinking Tokkos, if I'm being honest. But he's just so dog shit. Because, I was thinking Tokkos because I think Tafa is so dog shit. I've been fading Tafa my entire life. I think Tafa is dog shit. But, Tokkos is really, really, really bad. And, I know I'm the guy sitting in my chair in my room doing a prediction, not working in a gym to fight on this Saturday, so I really shouldn't say shit, but, both these guys are, this is a really, really poor, low-level fight. Low level, so do not put your money on it. I got Tafa. Give me round 1 knockout. Up next on the card, we got Vitor Petrino versus Austin Lane. Petrino comes to this 11-2, 27 years old, 6'2" with a 77-inch reach. Austin Lane is 15-5, 37 years old, 6'6" with an 80-inch reach. And really, the matchmaking on this one is honestly fucking hilarious. This is one of those fights that someone's gonna absolutely get exposed, or maybe even both of them, to be honest. When you start off with Lane, he's really big, he's athletic, and he has better striking fundamentals than you would actually honestly expect. And truthfully, I think he might be a cleaner striker than Petrino, but here's the issue. He's got an absolute glass chin. The guy's taking some damage in football, and it's shown. 6 brutal knockout losses as well in MMA alone. Even when he looks good early, it's hard to trust a fighter who can't take a punch. He also doesn't know how to use his reach really well whatsoever. He constantly commits fouls trying to manage distance, and he leaves himself often way too open far too often. It's frustrating because there's honestly really some potential here, but he just doesn't know how to protect himself. So, truthfully, Petrino's pretty fucking garbage. But so is Petrino. Petrino, he's not good at all. His striking is raw. He's unstructured and low volume. He'll just really stand there. He's square as fuck, waiting really to blitz forward with full force. He really doesn't, have a real striking process. He just really just throws to kill. But the thing when it comes to him that's really interesting is that he's explosive, tough enough to really take a punch, and can wrestle a bit as well. At heavyweight, that kind of raw athleticism and physicality might not be enough. He's got a strong double leg, decent top control, and he can muscle his way out of some bad positions. It's not really pretty, but it works, especially against someone like Lane, who doesn't really offer much resistance on the ground. Lane will sometimes try to wrestle, but it's basic stuff, shoot and pray sort of stuff. I don't really see him having success against, taking Petrino down or holding him there. And Petrino's defense wrestling is good enough to avoid danger, or at least get him back to the feet quickly if taken down. Both guys have some serious flaws to them. Petrino has no defense, no rhythm, and no setups on the feet. But Lane, I think, is worse. He's more fragile and less composed, and just flawed at kind of on almost every department. That's why I'm picking Vitor Petrino to win. You got to go by knockout as well, round 2 probably. I don't think he's a future contender, but I think I actually think he kind of, I actually really think he really sucks badly, to be honest. But Lane's chin is just too much of a liability here to not trust to not trust Petrino. But it's really hard to trust Petrino, especially if he's negative 600 going down weight. And he's been looking really, really bad. So it's another fight that's just awful. And, you got to choose Petrino, but who's paying negative 600 to get, to get him? So another fight that I'm completely avoiding. But give me Petrino by round 2 knockout. Up next on the card, we got Nate Landwehr versus Morgan Charriere. Landwehr comes into this 22-5, 37 years old, 5'9" with a 72-inch reach. Charriere comes into this 20-11, 29 years old, 5'8" with a 69-inch reach. I think this was one of the most interesting fights on the card, really. It's a lot closer than the odds suggest, in my opinion. Morgan is the favorite for a reason, of course. He's the better athlete. I think he has cleaner technique. He has more power and really doesn't fade late. But despite all that, I just really can't shake the feeling that this is the kind of fight that Nate really wants and kind of really usually wins. Nate's the kind of, he's, the king of turning fights ugly. He drags people into chaos. He feeds off the crowd energy and thrives in wars. And with this one happening in his hometown of Nashville, he's going to come into this going into the fire, His last fight was very, very rough, to be honest. He looked flat, unsure, even lost, truthfully. But there was personal circumstances there surrounding it, so there's context. But even then, it was really the worst version of him we've ever really seen. Still, I think that loss might have actually given him some fuel here. Morgan, on the other hand, has a tendency to under-deliver in fights he should win. He loses close decisions constantly. He's got power. He's very dynamic, but his volume is very low. Even in brawls, he's often backing off after landing rather than capitalizing. His negative strike differential is, really telling here. It's not that he gets outclassed. It's that he doesn't really press his edges. He also mirrors his opponents a lot. If you brawl, he brawls. If you grapple, he grapples. He sounds adaptable, but, it often plays right into his opponent's strengths. Against someone like Nate, I think that's going to be a big problem because Nate wants to scrap. Now, Morgan absolutely has the tools to hurt Nate, and Nate, gets cracked a lot. But Morgan's not a consistent enough, minute winner to feel confident. He'll control for the 3 rounds, sort of say. Nate's pace, and I think his pressure, especially his volume, can easily sway the judges here, especially with the hometown pop behind every exchange, really. And I think this is going to be a war. This could be a war. While Morgan might have the cleaner moments, I think Nate does what he always does, and I think he's going to make it dirty, and I think he's going to survive dangerous shots and edge out a close decision win here. And I wouldn't be shocked if Morgan wins this, of course, but I think Nate, going into this, the fact that, that Morgan's more of a chameleon, and the fact that this is in Nate's hometown, I think this is, more of a recipe for him to win at such dog odds as well. So give me Nate by decision on this one. Up next on the card, we got the fight that I cannot wait for. Calvin Kattar versus Steve Garcia. You got Kattar coming to this 23-9, 37 years old, 5'11" with a 72-inch reach. And you got Garcia 17-5, 33 years old, 6'0" with a 75-inch reach. And listen, I get it. Calvin Kattar is the popular underdog this week, but I think a lot of people are overlooking how dangerous Steve Garcia really is in this matchup. And I understand, I really truly do, that Garcia is wild. He crashes forward with his chin up and hands down, and he does have some defensive holes. And I do understand that Kattar has some really, really crisp boxing. But the thing is, that chaos is exactly what makes him lethal. He's not trying to be slick or technical. He's trying to break you in the first few exchanges. And against someone like Kattar, who's slowing down and taking damage, that could be all he needs. People love pointing out that Garcia's recent wins came against guys with bad chins. And they're not wrong. They're absolutely not. But what gets ignored is how he's beating them. He's not just clipping people. He's absolutely destroying them quickly and decisively. When he finds the opening, he closes the show. Kattar is undoubtedly more technical. His boxing is way more clean. He's got great elbows, and he's never been officially knocked out in the UFC, but he's also clearly declining. He's also 37 years old, and he's also on a four-fight losing streak. Meanwhile, you have Garcia that is like 6-1 in his UFC record. Let's be honest. His volume, when it comes to Kattar, his volume has dipped, and his ability to keep up with wild fights just isn't there like it used to be. The Emmett fight was close. The Allen fight ended in an injury. Sterling dominated him, and Zalal danced around him. But Garcia is gonna be a fight like any of those. Is not, it's not gonna be like any of those guys. He's gonna bring the pressure and test Kattar's defense right away. I'm not sure Kattar can keep up with that tempo anymore. Also, let's not pretend like cardio or size is gonna save Kattar here either. Garcia cuts a lot of weight and still comes in massive. He's used to overwhelming people with physicality, and Kattar really won't be able to, push him around in there, And even though Garcia's cardio can be a concern, I don't think this fight goes long enough for that to matter. Bottom line is Garcia's going to go home. Coming into this fight, bring this fight, immediately. He's going to throw with bad intentions, and if he catches Kattar early, I think he will. I think that's going to be the end of it. And now, trust me, I completely agree with you. Kattar has an absolute brolic chin. He's never been knocked out in the UFC, but he's 37, and he's only declining, and that must be said. He's in a 4-fight losing streak, and you guys, I get it. This is technically a step down in competition for Kattar and a massive step up for Garcia. But you got to look at these numbers. Garcia's 30 years old and absolutely mauling people. He absolutely, if you look at these wins, bro, like these wins are really, really aging like wine. Fine wine. Chase Hooper, that one looks great. With Melky, Costa was like a negative 550 favorite, and Garcia flatlined him so much so that that Costa was literally wrestling with the referee at the end of the fight. Like, we're talking about somebody that's been absolutely brutally beating people up. And it's like, I get it that the resume when it comes to Kattar is much higher, but we're not going to just disregard the fact that that Garcia has W's over Melky and Chase Hooper, which are very, very good wins. So I got to take the younger guy, and I'm going to take the guy who's winning a lot and just absolutely flatlining everybody. And I get why people are taking the Kattar side, but I'm not falling off this Steve Garcia train. And I'm not going to say that this fight isn't one of the scarier ones, but kind of all of these were, like everybody's arguing with me, if Melky was facing Garcia today, the odds would probably still be the same, and probably everybody would still be picking Melky, and Garcia flatlines him, And so for those cases, I just have to take him, especially over a declining and older Kattar who, let's be honest, he just does not look the same. So give me Garcia by round 1 knockout. Up next on the card, we got Stephen Wonderboy Thompson versus Gabriel Bonfim. Thompson comes to this 17-8, 42 years old, 6'0" with a 75-inch reach. Bonfim is 17-1, 27 years old, 6'1" with a 72-inch reach. And honestly, this is an extremely bizarre matchup on the card because on paper, it just doesn't really make sense. You got Thompson, he's 42 years old, coming off a brutal knockout, and has reportedly said he won't fight rising prospects or grapplers. So why in the fuck is he fighting Bonfim, who's a dangerous young grappler with crisp striking? Literally exactly what he said he wasn't going to fucking do. My guess is the UFC gave him an ultimatum: take this fight or just absolutely get cut. It really just makes the only sense here. Let's be honest. You're 42 years old and you're going to take who we give you. That kind of thing. You want the check? Here you go. We're going to give you Bonfim, which is absolutely brutal. Let's be honest. Now, stylistically, Bonfim brings problems. He's not a power puncher, but he's a clean, technical, and calculated fighter. His jab is very sharp. His timing is extremely elite, and he's patient. He's patient enough to wait for mistakes, which Thompson has been, making more and more a lot lately. In a pure kickboxing match, Wonderboy probably edges him out, but this fight won't stay there for long. Let's be real. Why would you? Bonfim's real danger comes from grappling. He's averaging almost 4 takedowns per fight at 76% accuracy, as well as he's fighting Wonderboy. Why in the world would you kickbox with the guy when what you're known for is grappling? That's just not. Also, 76% accuracy. It's not just good. It's very fucking elite. And when he gets you down, he's just not stalling there. He's hunting for the finish. He's looking for a submission. His submission game is very diverse. Real niche holds, guillotines, von flus, darces, you name it. Really, he's gonna look for it. He doesn't wait for opportunities. He honestly really creates them. Regarding Wonderboy, the striking IQ is extremely high, but the movement hasn't, it hasn't vanished completely, but his speed and reflexes and overall athleticism have taken an extremely noticeable dip. Against Buckley, even in a competitive fight, he looked off. He got tagged cleanly. He struggled to keep the range, and most importantly, he couldn't couldn't stop the takedown. And Buckley isn't even really a technical a technical wrestler, and that really is really the biggest concern here regarding Thompson. If Thompson can't, if he's struggling against Buckley, what happens against Bonfim, who's a far better technician, I really think that Bonfim finds a lot of success here, especially in the clinch where Bonfim throws brutal knees and makes the fight ugly. Even if Thompson gets back up, Bonfim is the type to follow up with submissions on the scramble, arm triangles, darces, back takes. Thompson had solid defense, but he's never, faced someone with this kind of aggression and submission arsenal, And honestly, let's be honest, age matters. Wear and tear matters. That KO loss really, that matters, especially at 42. The margin for error it just shrinks every single fight. So, I got Bonfim to weather the early striking, finding a takedown in round 2, and locking up a submission. It could be a Von Flue, could be an arm triangle, but once it hits the mat, I truly think that Wonder Boy gets out. And I got Bonfim here, and I'm extremely confident in this one. Give me Bonfim round 2 submission. Up next on the card, we got Derrick Lewis versus Tallison Teixeira. Lewis comes to this 28-12, 40 years old, 6'3" with a 79-inch reach. Teixeira comes to this undefeated, 8-0, 25 years old, 6'7" with an 83-inch reach. And honestly, this main event is really weird. Teixeira is getting a headliner off of one UFC win, which I think is really fucking weird. Derrick Lewis, most people don't really care about him anymore. Let's be honest, he's 40 years old. But with the UFC desperate for some fresh blood at heavyweight, here we are. They're just trying to look to make Tallison Teixeira a star, because he's 6'7" and like 26 years old, But he's very much still a mystery. After watching his tape, I definitely underestimated him. He's absolutely massive. He's 6'7", but what stands out is that he fights like it. He uses his size very well, fights behind a jab, throws leg kicks, and doesn't really just headhunt. He's finished guys with punches, elbows, and even head kicks. That's rare, extremely rare at heavyweight, especially, His competition has absolutely been awful, though. He's been fighting absolute cannons. He's shown, some surprising polish. Let's be honest, In the Lopez fight, against a terrible opponent, he rolled with the strikes well. Only ate a couple of clean shots, and even then he handled it. He's got that tall man defense leaning back, which will eventually get him clipped, let's be honest. But for now, he's going to get away with it. What makes this interesting is how Lewis fits into that. And the truth is, I don't think he does. Lewis has the power, no doubt, but he's slow, he gasses, and he's shown a clear pattern of quitting once things get ugly. The Pavlovich fight, the Tuivasa fight, he just dropped, almost like he was really just looking for a way out at that point. He hasn't fought in a year. He's almost 40. He is 40, and his recent wins haven't aged well whatsoever. The guys he's beat, they're no longer in the UFC anymore. On paper, he's a step up for Teixeira, but when you look really closer, is he really? Sort of thing, Another thing is Lewis has been shooting takedowns lately. He did it against Tuivasa. That tells me he doesn't want to throw his hands anymore. And if he tries to wrestle with Tallison, I think that's going to backfire. Tallison Teixeira is dangerous in the clinch and has already shown he can score some knockouts from there. The big red flag for Tallison Teixeira is his gas tank. He's never gone past the round 1. If this drags out, and he could fade out. Of course he can. He's a heavyweight. But guess what? So does Lewis. He openly said he hates 5-round fights. So if Teixeira doesn't gas first, I think he takes it. Honestly, Lewis's best chance is landing something huge and very early. But Tallison has, better defense than people really give him credit for, and he's very fucking tall. And he's shown he can avoid the early storm. Combine that with Lewis's recent form, his age, and the fact that he's pulled out on fight day before, I don't have a ton of faith in Lewis anymore, or really anymore at this point of his career, going forward. So, I got to go with Tallison Teixeira, and especially I got to go with Tallison Teixeira by round 1 knockout. He's never seen past it. I think both of these guys want to get out of there as soon as round 1 ends. Let's be honest. That's what they've always been paid for. I think it's like 8 first-round knockouts to 10, in this fight. So this card sucks so much ass that they put it on the poster. They put fucking stats on the poster. But yeah, give me Teixeira by round 1 knockout. Really, there's really nothing much else to say about this fight.